Gremlins, the afternoon gremlins. So I had my mic on mute rather now before we start. So thank you very much as we allow more people into the room. Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for Trialogue's February webinar. We've changed the time up slightly, and you'll soon find out why. We host these online forums every monthly on the last Thursday of the month. So mark it on your calendars. Today, we're looking ahead and discussing the trends and developments which are likely to drive CSI and development in 2025. So thank you very much for joining us today. See, we've already got a room full of people. Just to let you know that we have had, I think, a record sign up for today's webinar, which really speaks to the interest in driving impactful social initiatives, development, and CSI strategies. So we really are looking forward to today's discussion, to hear from you and your questions as well. And from our panelists, our esteemed panelists who've really got a wealth of experience in CSI and development, not only in South Africa, but in Brazil and India as well. So that's why we changed the time up slightly to accommodate our global village of the panelists that we have today. So let's jump straight into it. There's a lot to cover today. And as we always know, time runs out on us. So the seeds for 2025 were planted last year with an unprecedented number of general elections across the globe, ushering in new regimes and changes to social, economic, and political systems at both a national and a supranational level. Now, with this in mind, I'm looking forward to today's discussion as we unpack how businesses and NPOs can navigate these evolving trends, social dynamics, and maximize their social investment for sustainable impact. Hopefully, we can answer some of the questions which have been keeping you up at night. Thanks to our partners from Brazil and India who collaborate with us through the chief executives for corporate purpose. By now, you've seen that we've obviously coming to you live this afternoon as opposed to earlier in the day. This is to ensure our partners are able to join us to bring you a more global conversation with richer perspectives. Thank you to our panelists for sharing their insights and time with us. And thanks to you, our audience, for joining us this afternoon. Our monthly webinars are now 90 minutes, giving you more time to delve into the really important topics we deal with each month. Just a few technical notes before we kick off. There are two ways for you to engage on this call. You're welcome to use the chat function to connect with fellow delegates and share your thoughts on content. We also encourage you to ask questions through the session. For that, you can use the Q&A function rather than the chat box. So that's where I'll be drawing questions from for both the panelists through our conversation. So please, if you've got any questions, please pop them in there. I see a couple of comments already coming through in the chat as our participants continue to grow. So just a reminder, for questions, pop them into the Q&A box, and I'll pick from there to address to our panelists. If you can, make it short, sharp, and who you would like to address the question to. There's also a short survey which will pop up at the end of the session. Please do share your thoughts here so that we can improve these sessions and focus on the topics that are of particular interest to you. The session is being recorded, and an article and a recording will be made available to everyone who registered. So moving on to our agenda for today. After my brief introduction, I'll be handing over to each of our panelists for their opening comments. We'll then dive into the discussion, and our panelists will each answer some of your questions from the Q&A box. Each panelist will then give a short closing comment. The first poll, there'll be a series of polls, 4 polls that'll pop up. The first one will pop up on screen now. We'd like to know which type of organization you represent. This will help our panelists and I shape the discussion to make it as effective as possible for you. I'll leave that up for a while so you can vote on that one. Great to see the numbers still growing as people hop on this afternoon. Good showing from non-profit organizations, around 64%. We've got around 12-13% from big business, small business as well. Great to see government representation as well. Strong representation from consultants and academics as well. So thank you very much for that. Just makes our conversation richer. There we go. So that gives you an indication on who is in the room this afternoon. So thank you for that. I see a couple of familiar names on the call, so that's great. But I'm also pleased to see, and as I'd mentioned, with a record sign up, there are new names. Welcome to our CSI nonprofit network. A special welcome if you're a first timer. I'd like to take you through and tell you about Trialogue briefly. We're one of a few consultancies that focuses exclusively on responsible business. We do this through consulting services as well as through our knowledge sharing platforms, all of which aim to make corporate social investment in Africa more effective. The two main types of consulting that we do are CSI strategy development and monitoring and evaluation. You may know of our flagship platforms quite well, our Business and Society Handbook and our conference. But I'd like to share share more with you about our Trialogue Knowledge Hub. This is a repository of rich information available freely. And you can just, the write-up for this webinar and the recording will be uploaded to the Knowledge Hub. So you'll be able to find out what the Knowledge Hub is about. Let me share that with you now. I'd like to introduce you to the Trialogue Knowledge Hub, the leading information resource for social investors in Africa. The Knowledge Hub builds on Trialogue's deep knowledge and research-based strategy, which underpins the more established Business and Society Handbook and Conference. It's a unique repository of specialist information available for free to companies, non-profit organizations, governments, and scholars of African corporate social investment and responsible business. Since its launch in 2017, it has grown its coverage on a range of responsible business topics, including collaboration and shared value, showcasing the latest research, case studies, and insights. The Knowledge Hub offers a number of features, including articles, case studies, and expert opinions, offering valuable and in-depth information, development sector sections that demonstrate how and why to invest, with case studies and examples backed up by research. An Industry Leaders tab profiling companies and showcasing their CSI and responsible business objectives and initiatives, along with their news, insights, and case studies. A section featuring resources, guidance, and tips specifically for non-profit organizations. An NPO directory which features an accessible and easy-to-use list of South African NPOs. A function to search by development sector or responsible business topic, together with the search tool, making it simpler to find what you need. Visit the Knowledge Hub today and become a stronger social impact leader. Thank you. And Kathy Duff, our director, has shared the link in the chat function. So if you missed it on the video, you've got it in the chat function there. Just to touch on a bit as we begin our conversation for today. If you know Trialogue, you know we look at the evolution of CSI, and you would have seen it in our messaging, in our strategy, as well as we move from CSI 1.0, 2.0, and then leveraged CSI 3.0 as well. And our MD, Nick Rockey, will speak more to that as the conversation progresses there. But for CSI to be strategic, we believe it has to be aligned with and create value for the company. Value that goes further than mere reputation benefits, either through enhanced stakeholder relationships with key business stakeholders, suppliers, customers, consumers, employees, or through mechanisms that lead to competitive advantage there. I'm going to pull up the second poll for you now as we get into the real meat of today's conversation. Which of the following trends do you think will have the biggest impact on CSI in South Africa in 2025? Only a single choice, and I think it forces us to think, what's the one thing that we should be focusing on? I'll leave that up for a while as you vote on that. Okay, thanks. The votes coming in really thick and fast on this one here. Quite a mixed bag, actually. Increased multi-stakeholder partnerships for systemic change, a shift from traditional grant making to impact investment models, both of those coming at around 22%, with votes still coming in. Reduction in foreign funding, very topical at the moment, that one coming in at 20%. And I'm sure that will come up during the conversation this afternoon. Certainly a trend or a specter on the horizon affecting trends in CSI this year. Okay, I think that one's come in. Thank you very much for that. Let's share those results. There we go. Okay, so those results are in. Thank you very much. Let's move on to the next part of our conversation. I'm due to introduce our panelists soon, but just to give you a sense of CSI support and expenditure. As I've mentioned, we've got our Trialogue Business and Society Handbook, which was launched in December last year, looking at CSI support, NPO support. So as you can see here, these are the various different development sectors and the various levels of support that they receive. If we look at changes in expenditure, we know we've come from and probably still in a very precarious economic environment. A lot of headwinds there. You'll see increases in CSI budgets, but you also see some of them staying the same and noting decreases as well from that front. So we'll discuss and unpack how these trends are affecting CSI and development this afternoon. I'd now like to go and introduce the panelists for today. Nick Rockey, Trialogue Managing Director. Many of you who would have know him from our conference or your strategy sessions. Feryal Domingo, Acting Executive Director at Inyathelo. Just to mention that both Nick and Feryal will be leading masterclasses at this year's conference. So when registration opens up next week, please do have a look at those masterclasses there, as well as the conference itself. And then, as I'd mentioned, we're welcoming our distinguished guests, Patricia Loyola, Director of Management and Social Investment at Comunitas in Brazil, and Priya, Naik, CEO and co-founder of Samhita Social Ventures. So thank you all for joining us today. Just before I hand over to the panelists and we really get stuck into the conversation, let's put up the third poll. What do you think is the most pressing challenge for NPOs in South Africa this year? I think those two polls that we've just had and this one now will give us a really good indicator, good jump off for us to have a rich conversation for the rest of our time together this afternoon. So funding, financial stability, resilience coming through quite strongly in that in the votes there. The need for stronger impact measurement and reporting coming through at 16% there. Our theme this year for both the handbook and the upcoming conference is really impact. You know, how do we measure impact? How do we drive impact as well? So measuring measurement and reporting coming through strongly there. Declining public trust and donor confidence in the sector. And then political and economic instability affecting operations. Actually only coming through at 15%, you know, and sometimes it may indicate that, you know, it's more about the, you know, the noise isn't indicative of what our concerns are. So thank you for your votes on that, and we'll just share that poll. I'd now like to hand over to Nick. Nick, thank you very much. And to all our panelists, once we've gone through the opening comments, if you can then just leave your camera on and your mic open as well, so that we go immediately to you as soon as you start your answer there. Nick, I'd like to start off with you. What are the key trends you're picking up in the South African CSI sector? And can you give some examples?
Yeah, no, thank you, Sean. I mean, we've looked at these trends for a number of years and have tracked them, and we've categorized them. So I'll go through those categories and just talk to what they look like. But firstly, increasing integration. So for years, we've looked at this concept of alignment, as you were alluding to in your opening. And the broad principle there being that if you are aligned to your stakeholders, to the nature of your business, you're able to do more for that developmental, related developmental space than you would otherwise do. And obviously the returns or the synergies for the business are greatest as well. Importantly, we think that you know, drives a more strategic program. Companies are less fickle about what they're in and out of. They're in the programs for longer and ultimately can achieve more through that. So increasing integration through core business, through geographies that the organization operates in, through the stakeholders involving suppliers, customers, potentially government partners, employees as sort of brand ambassadors and volunteers for the organization, linking into the corporate brand, and ultimately leading to the sort of notion that CSI is not this sort of isolated function that it used to be, ring-fenced, you know, sort of run out of the basement of the organization with a few key dedicated staff, but much more integrated within the organization. And when you hear an organization, I listened to an interview the other day where a CEO was talking about their work in society. You know, they were referring to CSI work and to other initiatives, but without necessarily singling out, this is our CSI program. This was what the business is doing. This is what we're doing for these stakeholders. And sometimes you know, it sort of meddles in with what they're doing. And that's an indication of a program that's become quite integrated. We think enhanced ways of working is another way. Organizations becoming more professional, smarter about how they're doing the work. This notion of continuous learning, you know, business, I mean, development, I've always said it's a very tricky space to be in. It's easy to make mistakes. You're dealing with people's lives. You're dealing with a lot of complex, very complex issues. So this ability to understand what impact you're having, to learn and adjust as you're doing that, doing M&E not for the sake of M&E, but learning from that process and sharing that knowledge, using data, and we can maybe talk to that a bit later, There was a question you asked on AI. I think that's going to change and change the way that people are going about their work. Things like, outcomes-based funding or innovative, you asked a question, innovative or blending funding models. And again, you're starting to see not just the traditional grant being made and signed off. We think that that's still by and large, the predominant way of giving. But there are some sort of alternative ways coming in, and people testing different models there. And then the sort of last category of trend, if you like, is the sort of notion of driving broader impact, more systemic impact through your program. And you do that potentially by extending beyond the boundaries of the direct program itself, reaching out with research, with advocacy models, with sharing knowledge with a broader sort of ecosystem within that developmental space. Collaborating, we can talk to that later as well, a difficult process, but ultimately one can't do this alone. And much more speak of collaboration. It's difficult, not everyone gets it right, but there's a lot more speak of that, sort of driving a sort of stronger social justice agenda. And ultimately, extending the impact of your budgets way beyond what you're doing. And the reason for that, obviously, is CSI budgets are relatively small compared to what government's spending. And this is a way of being smart about what you're doing and influencing a broader ecosystem. So we're seeing some of those practices coming out now. Sometimes it's sort of experimental, companies doing things and learning from that, and then understanding where they're going. But definitely we're seeing examples of that. Those are the many trends. So I don't highlight examples for all of those different trends, but there definitely is a lot more speak of this in action in that space. And then just to close, I think from my side, you put up the sort of 3 evolution of CSI chart, and these trends are driving that evolution, if you like. It's not to say that everything has evolved to the final point, but we see this as the space, having been in the space a long time, and looking at your early CSI programs where it was very much reactive grant making. Here's our focus areas, companies apply for funds. If you meet our criteria, we might give you a fund for this year or some funds for this year. We write a story about who we've given money to, but very much on funding activities as opposed to outcomes. To the sort of second generation CSI, where we see a lot of flagship programs, longer term involvement by companies putting in M&E, more aligned programs, and we were sort of termed that the sort of 2.0 sort of model, if you like. And I think that's probably predominantly where most CSI budgets go into. And then companies starting to reach in a sort of leverage CSI space, where they are thinking about how to have broader systemic impact. And it's maybe not for everyone. It takes a lot of investment outside of your traditional grant-making processes. You need budgets and influence to be able to do that. But we certainly see a lot of interest from companies starting to brand and say, look, this is where we're going, this is what we're going to be doing, and picking up elements of that sort of leverage CSI through their programs. And look, I think there's space for all of those different approaches in the CSI space. And it's not to say one approach is necessarily better. It depends on your circumstances and your context. But that's where we see things sort of migrating towards.
Thanks for that, Nick. Feryal, I'd now like to turn to you. You wrote an article earlier this year, starting off, looking at trends in the non-profit sector. What are some of the key trends you're seeing coming through, concerns, and how do you expect, that to change the development sector or impact it in 2025?
Hi, thank you, Sheldon. I wanted to pick up from where Nick started to talk about it started to talk about evolution, and I was sort of thinking about the evolving CSI landscape a little bit. And just before I get stuck into the real question that you wanted me to respond to, I think it is, without a doubt, we've seen a major shift in the way that in the approach also of CSI, and just the whole landscape that has changed. We're no longer operating in a world of simple grant requests. Today, we're navigating a very, very complex ecosystem. And this is driven largely, of course, by global pressures, innovative funding models, and there's a lot of focus, and in fact, I want to say a laser focus on demonstrable impact. And so for us as nonprofits, this means adapting, it means innovating, it means building truly strategic partnerships with CSI partners and philanthropy. And so it is also, you know, it means it's putting another layer of complexity onto the already complex work that we're doing and the challenges that we're facing to have all the right resources in order for us to live the mission and to make a big, big difference out there. So I wanted just to start off by saying that, and thanks, Nick, for getting that sparked in my head. Sheldon, in response to some of the major trends that we've been seeing, some of the new challenges, and there are obviously a lot of opportunities for nonprofits, but it's having to navigate in this, as I said earlier on, in a shifting landscape. And in 2025, we've seen this marked by significant socioeconomic challenges. And of course, technological opportunities. I think if you're not talking technology, then you know you're certainly in another era still. So the rising cost of living and deepening disparities will surely intensify the demands placed on NPOs. And we've seen the increase of demands. I need not even to mention the recent challenges that we've seen, even on a daily basis, that it just goes from one level to the next. You know, I'm talking about the Trump factor. And so that in itself has just brought a whole new layer of challenges to us that we haven't even managed to get through before this started. And then at the same time, there's a push for digital transformation driven by advancements in AI. You spoke about that as well, Nick, and an evolving technological landscape. And this will require investments. Again, you know, it's easy to say, well, shift over, you know, you can't live in yesterday's era. But as nonprofits, we often don't have the rands and cents that lies around to make that shift immediate. It takes time, you've got to transition. And so it's also to bring this team on board because, you know, not everyone is as technologically inclined as we want them to be. And so there again, it's a trend that I'm seeing. And even though we've come out of COVID and we've all learned and we've all understood that massive shifts did happen, but not everyone, right? So there's still a huge number of people who haven't come to that part yet. The other big trend that I would like to talk about is the Financial Action Task Force regulations. That's specifically around Recommendation 8, which imposes very, very stringent anti-money laundering and counter-terrorism financing requirements on NPOs. Again, not enough people have a very clear understanding of why South Africa is sitting on the grey list and what the NPO sector has to do to implement, to put in place in order to comply with the recommendations that set out, and in order for us then to come off the grey list as a country. And as I'm talking to people on a very regular basis through webinars and other forms of communication, I'm hearing people don't even know what the word means. And so how then do we bring on board a very, very big level of understanding within the NPO sector, but also how does CSI come to the party? I want to say very honestly that I mean, we sent out so many communiques with opened up opportunities for discussions. There's maybe one or two people that I see from corporates who join. There's in other platforms when I'm communicating, they're not quite sure, and maybe I'm not talking to the right people, but I'm just not seeing that collaboration coming together. I'm not seeing how corporates are reaching out to understand how they can play a meaningful role to assist NGOs. And we're going to talk about compliance because that's really, I think, where we can, as CSI, we can play a role. So the issues around FATF, the risk on organizations, the risk on the sector is enormous. And I think it's really a very good time for us to understand what that is and what our role can be in mitigating or helping to implement some of the recommendations. The other trend that I've seen is the issue of the new tax regulations. So the South African Revenue Service has introduced important changes regarding Section 18A legislation. And again, here we've put out a lot of communiques. We've, communicated with all different types of groups, and also to make sure that the nonprofit sector understands what this means for them, right? So this Section 18A governs tax deductible donations. So you can no longer just issue an 18A certificate. There's certain information that you have to collect. There's stuff that you have to do on your website, etc. We don't all know that. And how do we reach all of these people? And often the CSI sector, the philanthropist requires a Section 18A certificate from the NGO, with maybe not very clearly understanding what the NGO needs to have in place in order to provide that 18A certificate. Then the other big one is the DSD compliance, the Department of Social Development. You will notice that recently they've communicated that they are starting to deregister huge numbers of NGOs. What does it mean? What does it mean that some of you may have invested in some of these organizations? Have you done due diligence on these organizations before you invest in them? I'm assuming yes. Where you haven't, what can you do? Where you've invested in organizations that's falling through the cracks, is there a responsibility for you to help them get back on track? I'm putting all this out there. I don't know. I'm just putting it out there so that, we can begin to think about it. It doesn't just end when you hand over the grant. There are many other things that we can do to support the NGO to remain compliant. Because out of the 500,000 NGOs that we know exist, 231,000 is registered. About half of that is not compliant. That's a crazy number. Then there's the impact of AI. The impact of AI, I think AI-powered tools can definitely enable NGOs to automate some of the routine tasks that they're doing. I know it can help to analyze large data sets for insights into donor behavior and program effectiveness. So there again, not a lot of NGOs understand and are willing to take the risk on AI. Just today we convened a session on AI, and it's just basic, and the room was packed. Looks like there's a lot of interest. How do we take that forward? How do we help that? So there are many other trends, Sheldon, but maybe I'll just pause for now to allow some of the other panelists to talk.
Always so much for us to unpack in this very vibrant sector. Thanks very much for that, Feryal. I'm sure we'll unpack some of those, and where we don't have the answers, as you said, to kickstart some of those conversations around it. Priya, I'd like to come to you. It's been over a decade since the Companies Act, legislated CSI spend and reporting requirements in India. Over that time, how have you seen corporate social responsibility develop?
Thank you, Sheldon. And can I just say a +1 to a lot of the comments that Nick and Feryal made? I'm sitting here thinking that a lot of this sounds like India, right? So the fact that this is a completely different continent, but with the same set of challenges and the same set of opportunities. Nick, thank you for making this happen, just because we see so much sort of shared interest, right? And ongoing challenges. But Sheldon, to your question, right? So we're a lot like South Africa. For example, when I saw your survey in terms of where companies are spending their CSI money, it's a lot of the same. It's education, it's community development, it's food and agri, health, employability. So it's stacking up. You could have just hidden South Africa and you could have just replaced it with India and it would all still be true, right? So some of the positives. One, I think because CSR in India is now a board responsibility, we're seeing a lot more engagement from the board and CXOs. So it's no longer the CSI manager that is thinking about this, but he now has an ecosystem of support internally. The second positive trend is really because the government has mandated, and it has, I mean, it has both sides to it. But we now find that a lot of corporates are fully aligned with national priorities of education, job creation, entrepreneurship. Similar to South Africa, we have a large proportion of young people entering the workforce every year. There just aren't enough jobs or entrepreneurship opportunities. And that's really where we're seeing the private sector working closely with the government to unlock both business and CSI resources to be able to create that change. Otherwise, all of us are going to be in trouble. Third, we're really seeing a shift from individual programs to a lot of collaborative work happening, right? And Nick talked a little bit about that for all kinds of reasons. One, companies increasingly understanding that India is complex, the problems are large, and their budgets have to go a really long way. The only way to do that is to collaborate proactively with the government, with foreign foundations, with NGOs. They haven't really learned to collaborate with each other yet, which is strange, but they'll get there, right? Because really there is no choice. The expectations from the private sector are mounting, and they're very quickly learning to move away from individual flagship programs to thinking not just collaboration, but also strategic and catalytic CSI. So I just want to give 2, 3 quick examples. One, we're seeing India's largest FMCG company, for example, use its entire pharmacy channel to now convert pharmacists into healthcare entrepreneurs, right? Just saying, hey, you already deliver critical medicines, but can you also now be a healthcare champion? Can we educate you on women's health, NCDs, etc.? And can you be the first port of call for a lot of ongoing guidance that a community needs? Second, we're seeing, again, one of the world's largest retailers using CSR money to strengthen their supply chains. So, for example, they realize that the farmers from whom they source from never get access to credit because banks consider them high risk. So, they've used their CSI money to actually create a credit guarantee to convince lenders to lend to farmers who they know are no more risky than anyone else, but the lender hasn't figured that out yet, right? A great way of using CSR money to unlock 10x the amount of lending to a farmer. Third, and this is a case study that we've published with Trialogue, is one of India's financial services companies realizing that tens of millions of Indians get locked out of the formal financial ecosystem because a bank has no idea how to evaluate a borrower. Imagine I'm an artisan. I only sell 4 times a year during the festival season. And when a banker looks at my balance sheet, which, by the way, I'm doing a cash business, so it's hard for them to even know. They don't understand whether this business can even take money and repay money. So for the first time with a financial services company, we're building a pre-credit score. So a mechanism to take skilling data, training data, etc. on an entrepreneur and use that as an alternate to credit evaluation data. But the beauty of this is that they're not doing this for one lender or 2 lenders. They're doing it for the 200 lenders in the country, which means you're building public goods that a large number of financial institutions can use to underwrite and lend to people who otherwise will get locked out of the formal financial ecosystem, right? So terrific examples of company not just thinking strategically and collaboratively, but really pushing the boundaries on what they can do in national interest. And then I just wanted to pick up a couple of points that Feryal made, which is, we, similar to South Africa, are seeing at this almost bipolar world, a world full of opportunities where AI and technology is going to bring so many positive changes. And we love the fact that companies like Microsoft and a lot of others are saying, hey, it's not just AI for me as an institution, but how do I use AI for development, for entrepreneurship, for job creation, for environment, for healthcare? So we love the push that companies are making to say there are all of these assets that should be used for public good. And yet, and Feryal, you talked a little bit about this, which is we're seeing at a world of scarcity. USAID has pulled out its money. So just so you know, 30% of my team was on USAID funding. And USAID was funding a lot of the work that we do on public goods, which means that for us to find any funder who understands the complexity of creating public goods is going to be at least 2 years away, right? So there isn't a funder in sight who gets it. And this is not just us. I mean, all of you are experiencing it. We are too. As of yesterday, I think the UK government also announced a cut in their foreign aid. And so at a time when our own countries, are struggling with economic security, and when so many organizations rely on evolved foreign funding, it's not like there are these immediate substitutes. And yet, in a sector which is full of scarcity and disadvantage, we are expected to show up day after day with generosity. Generosity for our people, for our communities, right? We go above and beyond the call of duty. And yet we do this in an environment where money disappears overnight, people aren't available, the talent doesn't exist. We're still coming to terms with changing compliance, changing governance, just a changing world order. And so the question really is, and I know that we'll get into it later on, is what is the role of the private sector? Because the private sector can't just come in and step in and compensate for what USAID or FCDO was doing, but they have to build a new way of dealing with not just the nonprofit sector, but the country as a whole, right? Because imagine what has just happened. People who were receiving healthcare are not receiving healthcare anymore. People who were receiving education, skills, jobs, environment grants are not getting that money anymore, right? It's going to create not just havoc, but a level of financial, economic insecurity that's unprecedented. And therefore, the question is that do companies show up because they should? But it's in their self-interest to show up now and really find creative ways to engage much more systematically, because we're all on the same side. We're all trying to serve the same communities, the same country together. And therefore, and this is sort of the last thing I want to say, is that what we have seen in India is this momentum towards understanding that it's not you versus me. It's just a continuum, right? That nonprofits do the work that they do, but then the government comes in and then private sector comes in. And so how quickly can we go to the private sector with models that work, where success has been demonstrated, where evidence has been created, because they don't have the time and we don't have the time for them to think afresh, right? So you quickly want to band together and say, here are 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 ideas. Pick one, co-create it, roll with us, right? Because everyone needs each other. But just wanted to pause there. And then if anyone wants to talk about USAID and general event, I'm happy to do that even offline.
Thank you so much, Priya. Yeah, I think there's a lot to unpack on that one. And Kathy has shared the link to the case study that Priya mentioned, which featured originally in our Business in Society Handbook 2024. So if you want to read up more on that afterwards, Kathy has posted that link. Patricia, let me come to you now. Now, you conduct annual research with Brazilian foundations. What are some of the key trends you're seeing in Brazilian CSI, and are those in line with, you've heard a bit from, South Africa and India, are those in line with, what you see coming out of Brazil?
Thank you, Sheldon. And before starting, I agree with Priya. Here in Brazil, we have a quite similar scenario with you. Maybe the only topic that's have more investment here is culture, because there is a tax incentive that comes through the government, and this is the most consolidated law here in Brazil, which the tax incentives that goes to culture. But all the other topics, as education and community development, there are really great challenges for us. I believe that we have similar atmospheres in our country. So I believe that what we see in our research, we have been implemented for the last maybe 16 years. And we have a timeline that shows that the volume of the growth of the companies is not going up as we wanted to to do, but it's going by side, if you know what I mean. In the pandemic, of course, we had a lot of extraordinary resources being invested with COVID, but then after that, we have a small increase, small growth of the volume of the investment of the companies, but it was an isolated movement from our greatest investors. So what we see here, the coalitions and partnerships, they are a clear path to gaining scale and to do multi-stakeholders and to look to system complex and problems that could be solved in partnership. But direct interventions, it's also a need for the short term to give social returns, because Brazil is one of the worst countries in inequality ranking, and the need is at their door, at our door, in the companies and the organizations. So they are looking for to act in a hybrid, how can I say, in a hybrid model, to do short-term and direct interventions, but also to look for major coalitions and partnerships. Including some companies, as Priya mentioned, they are looking to their chain value. We have some examples here. They are fostering their suppliers to start or to qualify their CSI. So there are some partners of ours that we are systematizing their experience and trying to show that and help them to disseminate and maybe to replicate their model and to exchange this experience. We have the climate warning. So looking for the World Economic Forum, the global risks that were launched last year, some of the worst concerns to government, academia, and also private sector and civil society is the climate, as well as the societal problems, geopolitical conflicts, and the technological. So I agree that AI is going to be, it's going to open a large, how can I say, a large universe of opportunities, but also will be would take more difficult to people that are ready with lack of education, and we know what I mean, because it's quite a similar scenario in South Africa and India. So, but what we see regarding the climate warming, it's that companies, there was a huge increase of the percentage of Brazilian companies that are investing on that. So it was covered by 22% of our companies like 2-3 years ago, and it comes to 85% of companies that are responding to that. Brazil, we don't have hurricanes or earthquakes, so that was like an historic concern for us. But the climate warning, it start to bring more floods and raining, and this is starting to be more and more aggressive, and with the vulnerable people. So they are starting to do a lot of things, and we don't believe that they are going to shift to a climate action, but climate is going to be like a lamp on their education programs. They are going to start to talk more about resilience, resilience of the education, because there are a lot of child and youth that are out of the schools because the schools are under the water, and they are serving as shelters to people that lost their homes. So we just published a book regarding the action of the companies here because of this red sign that we saw. So there is a demand for accelerate this innovation and the cross-sector collaboration. If you look to the climate lines and to guide the social actions, regarding the AI, we see that will permeate all the aspects of business, extending to sustainability and CSR. So we believe that we have a great challenge to face in developed countries, because this distance will be larger for us, the distance between the wealthy people and the more vulnerable. And there is the polarization of society. So we are seeing all the aid that was taken off, and there is an ideological question here, and an economical question that is impacting directly our communities and our projects. So I believe that we saw backlash, the ESG backlash, especially in the US, since 2022. So it's even not last year. It's making difficult for companies to carry actions and communications there that affecting somehow here in Brazil. Maybe it's an opportunity to companies that are really doing seriously with purpose the practice that they are doing, to stand up and to show the difference that they can make. And the people that was like only because of the fashion of ESG fashion, they are not going to be standing, you know.
Okay.
What else?
Okay. No, that's a good thought.
Yeah, I that's some of my thoughts, and thank you.
Thank you, Patricia. To all the panelists, quickly, if you could just leave your mic and your cameras on so that it comes to you immediately as I throw the question to you. Thank you to our attendees for your questions. Just a reminder, you can pop those into the Q&A box. I see a couple have already come through. Thank you so much. I really think those were rich engagements, rich opening comments from our panelists, certainly indicating that there is a lot to talk about. I think let's kickstart with the elephant in the room, because I know we've had a couple of questions around it. I don't want us to spend too much time on it, because as your opening comments have indicated, there is a lot for us to unpack around that. But Nick, let me start with you. I think a bit of sense making, there's been a lot of noise. There's, whether it's in the media, whether it's Donald Trump himself, if you weren't too clear about what I was talking about, Donald Trump, the American president has come out with a number of executive orders. There's been a lot of noise, Nick, and some of the questions here point to it, saying, has there been a major, thank you, Barry, has there been a major paradigm shift in CSI driven by the new administration from the US? For businesses trying to make sense of this, Nick, what's your perspective on this in some of the rhetoric coming through? How do they make sense of it in some of the noise?
I think it's very difficult, and it's an evolving space. Obviously USAID, as some of the other panelists spoke about, is an immediate impact. And with DFID, the UK government, shifting funds across into defence as opposed to foreign aid, is that a trend, and will it impact us? I think that with all funding, that one has to be cautious if you have a single source of funding, whether it's government, corporate, or any other funding. And it's very difficult not to, if you have a dominant fund and you're implementing a program kind of on their behalf. So if you're part of PEPFAR in South Africa, you're going to be impacted, and it's going to take a while for that to recover and step in. I think Priya was talking about the role of the different players, non-profits, government, private sector. And there's a traditional role, private sector pays taxes, government is primarily responsible for development, civil society do their thing. And but it's not, it's a lot more complicated than that. And corporates do need to step in. I don't think that the corporate role is to provide broad symptomatic relief. We just don't have the firepower. We can't fix the education system as companies. We can't tackle the thorny issues holistically, but we can, within an ecosystem, companies can make a very profound and significant impact. There are education programs that with thousands of students through a tertiary degree. It's not fixing the education system, but for that ecosystem that they're involved in, it makes a big impact. Likewise with organizations in gender-based violence that are, creating absolute, tens of thousands of people are channeling programs through that. Priya spoke about very powerful programs in India. So there's a most definite role. I don't think that if you look at USAID, it's going to impact those that are in that space, particularly in the HIV space, severely. One can argue whether we should have been reliant on that funding. They stepped in, and the funding is significant. Primarily, government will need to fill that hole, I think. But what's that going to mean in terms of their ability to do so, and what that displaces when we're really budget constrained, as you know. So yes, I do think there's a shake-up, and this has initiated that, and I think it'll take some adjustment. It is disruptive for those that are directly affected. For those that are reliant on that funding, it's massively problematic, and it will settle somewhere in a different space. I don't think that companies should immediately react and try and fill that hole. The programs that they're already funding are valuable programs. So I think it makes sense for them to stay in their lane to some extent, and where they are impacted, to look at what they can do differently. Sort of invest more in, I think, in advocacy type processes that can influence others out there to achieve positive outcomes. I'll stop there because I think I'm going around in circles at the moment. But yeah.
Thanks, Nick. Thanks. Feryal, on that note, I mean, building on what Nick has said, in terms of the long-term perspective and what business can do in the short term, and this is building on a question from Samhita Naidu. Given the fact that almost all USAID funded partners in SA received notices of termination, as we know, around the HIV programs, what role can CSI play? And I'm just thinking some actionable steps, Feryal, in the short term, whether it be funding, policy, influence, what can be done? Because for those NPOs, the impact is real and in your face. Feryal, you're on mute.
Yes,
there we go.
So yeah, so a lot can be done. I mean, again, Nick spoke about he thinks that CSI should stay in their lane, and I don't, and because I do think that it's okay now and again to go outside your lane. Actually, you'll see some interesting things outside your lane. But I really am very serious about that, because if one continues to fund program delivery, to what end? Because if that organization structurally isn't set up to think about its own long-term sustainability, then your program is going to be short-lived. The impact that you're going to make is short-lived, right? I mean, this is just from our own experience, in that what I'm seeing CSI and philanthropists do is that lately, over the last couple of years, they've actually invested in sustainability measures where they review what the governance structure is of the organization. Is this the right board? Does the board know their roles and responsibilities? Are they capable of taking the organization to the next level? Can they actually focus on sustainability within the organization? And then they would invest in strengthening that board. And I'm not going to use the term capacity building, right? Because sometimes it's a swear word in the sector. And so it's about strengthening the board, right? Making sure that boards and the team who are running the organization thinks beyond just program delivery, but what measures can they put in place to diversify their income, I think is the big word. How do you diversify your income without totally relying on grant income? And NPOs exist to work from grant income. So I'm not even suggesting that they abort that and suddenly now start social enterprises, because they're never going to make in a social enterprise what you can generate in revenue in terms of grant revenue, right? And so, but what I'm saying is that begin to think a little bit broadly, think outside the box. Think about how you can do things differently so that you can think about the next few years. And I'll give you an example. Some of our clients, some of the people that we work with have reserves in place, right? And so some of them have massive budgets with no reserve. So they operate these giant programs on a year-on-year basis, but they're constantly in a state of flux because I don't know where my next grant is going to come from. I really don't know. I don't have the. And so how do we begin to make that shift? And so it is really about thinking differently. Now, of course, what I'm suggesting here means a different kind of individual in the organization, because now when you're talking about adding on a component as a social enterprise compared to just delivery of program, seeking the grants, getting the money in, and then delivering and monitoring and evaluating those programs, you're now looking at a whole new set of people, brain skills, you know, that you need, and your board is going to be looking differently as well. So there's a big shift, and not a lot of organizations are ready to do that. Where we've seen the success is when there's been an investment in providing that support for governing, for the governing body to be able to then set up and structure a 3-5 year plan towards something that is a bit more sustainable than totally relying from you know, your 1, 2, 3 per grant income funding, as Nick suggested. You can no longer rely only on grant income. And I do also think that while I've got the floor, that and I want to say that perhaps CSI should move out of the transactional relationship and then build collaborations that helps to create shared value. So it's exactly what I was saying, you know, and again, I'm being very respectful with the audience, but I think it's a platform for me to be able to share what I'm experiencing on a day-to-day level. Thanks, Sheldon.
Thanks for that, Feryal, and it's good. I mean, it's good for robust discussion, bit of disagreement, so that we can, you know, get to the strongest thoughts around that. Priya, I've picked up you're quite passionate around the developments out of the US. We've obviously got heard a lot and have a very locally focused lens in terms of the impact that's come out there. Just briefly, you know, how have developments been received in India, and what has been the you know, on the ground impact, if any?
Sheldon, you know, we're a poor country with some rich people, right? That's not how the world sees us. The world sees us as a country very rapidly emerging from a developing economy to a developed economy. That's true of some part of India. It's not true of a large part of India, right? And so for us, I think there is the tension, and I'm sure that the tension is true in South Africa and other places as well, which is we want to have homegrown strategies that do justice to our culture, our region, our problems. But really, our culture, our region, our problems are very similar to a lot of the global south, right? And so we have this constant pull and push between foreign funders coming in and having their view of India and Indians believing that they have their view of India. The right answer is both those views are correct, right? And so the question is not who's right, it's just can you build a continuum of the right set of inputs? So I'll tell you where it's impacted us. One, I think essential services, like Feryal was also saying, I mean, really, the government needs to step up and provide those essential services. So it's also a wake up call to the government to say that there were gaps in your execution or in your policies that other people were filling temporarily, and it's time for you to step up, right? Second, it is also a wake up call, like Feryal said, for our nonprofits, which is you rely, and this is including us. So a bulk of our organization budget comes from USAID and Gates. And we were being told year after year that this needs to be a by India, for India, with India story. which I love to hear. But the question is, where are the Indian philanthropists? Where is the Indian CSI ecosystem? Because they are still very much in a programmatic compliance mode, right? Only a handful of them are really stretching the boundaries of what's possible. So I feel like a new world has been thrust upon us, a world of turbulence and uncertainty. And we need to, within that world, reimagine a world of support, grit, resilience, just evolve to ensure that we stay stronger together, right? Which means two, three things. And again, like a plus one to what I heard Nick and Feryal say. One, we have to recognize that across the social development agenda, who is the right actor to solve which problem at what point in time? At some point in time, what the government needs to provide needs to become the citizen's responsibility. At some point in time, what the government provides needs to become the private sector's responsibility, to really create a continuum of responsibilities and for everyone to not just know their lane, but to be able to shift across those lanes as other actors change their responsibilities, right? So a little bit of that shape shifting is going to become important because the disappearance of folks like USAID, etc., are creating havoc, and we cannot afford to be in a position as countries where that havoc is okay. Second, I think to think catalytically, to think of building institutions, to think of building public goods is going to be vital, right? And so suddenly we are beginning to see at least early conversation around CSI to say, hey, we actually do need to think about things like technology in terms of how do you reach the last mile, because the cost of reach has to dramatically come down because there is no money anymore. We have to shift from grants to returnable grants to catalytic structures because there is no money anymore. And we have to create mechanisms to enable that money. We have to go from programmatic funding to also building institutional capacity because when that program money disappears, that institution has to figure out how to continue to stay committed to their communities. We have to get people to participate in paying the cost of the services that we give to them. They don't have to pay 100%, but over a period of time, they have to start seeing the value and begin to create models so that they can participate, right? So the three things I want to say is that the role of everybody involved has to shift. The recipient has to become a participant, the participant has to become a customer, the customer has to become a champion, right? The government has to say that they stay within their lane of providing services, but they have to deliver it with more efficiency, more efficacy, more inclusion, because inclusion is gone, right, in our world right now. Second, private sector has to be strategic, catalytic, collaborative, because they don't have a choice anymore, right? And third, we really have to figure out new ways of working with each other, new instruments, new technology, new innovation, right? Use AI for good. And I think what I want to say is that all of these are good things to have, but these have become urgent, right? We can't survive. This has become necessary. So anybody who had 2 years to think of their sustainability strategy doesn't have 2 years anymore, right? I mean, they have to figure it out today. So I think a lot of what we saw as being positives during the pandemic, rapid collaboration, right? Rapid innovation, rapid sharing of knowledge, insights, whatever. This is a pandemic. And so can we come to the table with the same level of urgency and openness and generosity as we did earlier? And we're not doing this for ourselves, right? This is not about us surviving. This is about all of the communities that depend on us. And so if we don't get our act together, those communities who are already very vulnerable don't have the ability to get to the next and the next day. So collaboration, innovation, speed, urgency is what I would end with.
Perfect. I mean, if you think of, if you're taking a tidbit article out of it, what are the big trends? It's, collaboration, as you'd mentioned, it's the core, in the case study that you have shared with us. Nick mentioned it as well. I think, Feryal mentioned it, as did Patricia, in some sort of form. How do we strengthen collaboration? I know it's been spoken about. I know the ideology is there and everyone gets it, but the practicality of what we're seeing is not necessarily is not necessarily there. Patricia, I want to come to you. I want to move to something, employee volunteering, employee engagement. So when we've been talking about, filling the gap and what CSI can do, for most of us, the immediate thought goes to funding, right? It's financial and the like. From what you see in research and trends over time, how have you seen employee volunteering programs, employee engagement as part of CSI? How have you seen that develop in Brazil?
There's a lot of companies that they have corporate volunteers. They are long time doing that. It's an important part of the CSI, not as maybe the most strategic, because there's a lot of they are being doing in volunteering. That's also for the internal, how can I say, the internal practice, and to develop human abilities and everything. We saw by our survey, and that volunteering, it's something that's not consolidated as always with the same behavior. It goes up and down, even the number of volunteers engaged, and also the investments they are applying, because it responds a lot to the companies. How can I say, the mood of the companies, because what happens that we have a lot of economic issues, and when we are in a crisis here, or political or economics, there's a lot of people being laid off, and then in this kind of period, the volunteer actions, they are going like down, they decrease, because they are not the environment as much as receptive to do that kind of action. But we have good examples of companies that are able to engage their whole team, and also to engage their supply chain, their suppliers to participate. They do that in collaboration of others. Some of them, that's something more hands-on and do like one day of actions. But there's a lot of skill-based volunteering, and also the pro bono. What we hear from the small organizations, and from some governments, that they don't have good capacity to develop projects here, to go after resources, federal resources, everything. It's that skill-based volunteering is really strategic for them to better this capacity, this institutional capacity. So there's a lot of things being done in the pandemic. There was a lot of digital volunteering. Right now, they went back to the presential for the physical contact, but there's some of them they are remaining the digital. So we have a hybrid format of support, I believe.
Thanks, Patricia. I want to turn attention now to monitoring and evaluations, specifically from the point of view of impact, right? Nick, impact is why everyone does CSI or development work, right? It's about having impact on people's lives, ultimately, in a nutshell. But indicators are that, monitoring and evaluation, at least from the corporate side, and I imagine it may be Feryal the same from the NPO sector, isn't as strong as it can be in terms of, that value chain of adding value to strategies and the like. Nick, why is that the case? And what can companies do to, strengthen their M&E?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it is important. If you can't see what's going on, it's very hard to respond, to adjust, to measure. But it's difficult. It costs money. It takes time. It takes effort. Our experience is often that when we look at a program, we can see a lot of data, but it's hard to see the wood for the tree sometimes. And really figure out what the data is saying or showing. It's costly, it takes effort, but you can build in very simple metrics as you design the programs, as you track them, you can build the tracking into the running of the program. So it needn't be as complicated as sometimes it's made out to be. Use evaluation measures to test certain things. So I think that there's a lot of room for improvement in that space, where there's ongoing tracking, where there's usage and application of the outcomes, that there's sharing of information. We can look in a particular developmental sector, and we know that there's a lot of M&E across different models in that sector. Talk about, EdTech and using technology platforms for education. Yet what we're not seeing is that these programs coming together, sharing insights based on their learning, understanding the pros and cons of the different models, what works, what doesn't work, as an example. And that's where I think that the space can move to. So I think the tension is there. The priority is probably there. A lot could be done in terms of smoothing out that, making that more efficient. But I do think it's an important, it's a vital part of what we're doing. And it doesn't have to be a linear process. A linear process, everyone gets stuck up with theories of change and log frames. But it's, I think that those are important concepts. But just understanding what you're doing and using the right processes to do that, and measure that and share that, I think it's important.
Priya, looking towards innovation, I mean, your case study and some of the work Samhita has done certainly speaks to the innovation coming out of, CSI in India. What's one emerging trend that's getting you excited, about in the development space and sector in India?
So can I talk about two?
Yes.
One is just a blended finance continuum, right? So for the last few years, and because of the scarcity of resources, we're seeing companies go from doing grants to potentially returnable grants. A returnable grant, very simply, is zero interest, zero collateral, pay if you can, when you can. So for example, companies that were typically doing skilling courses as grants can now offer the same course as a returnable grant, which means somebody takes the money, gets skilled, finds a job, and then pays the money back, right? Or an entrepreneur takes the money to set up her tiny business. As the business does well, you pay the money back. When we first started looking at it, imagine if I gave all of you, right, $1,000 today, and if I said, you don't have to pay me the money back, and if I were to just call you a year from now, would you actually give me the money back? Unlikely. 90% of the people that we gave the money to gave the money back, right? It does a few things. It means that both for the company and for the NGO partner. So for the NGO partner, instead of starting their, and Feryal, you talked about this. So every year, if I have to start my budget with $100,000, that's really tough. But this year, if I did $100,000 of returnable grants in skilling, and let's say 70% of people paid back the money, the next year I start with 770,000 in my bank. I only have to raise the additional 30%, right? So it reduces fundraising responsibility. The same money gets recycled. So the company now has the ability to fund the first 10,000, the next 7,000, more and more. And more importantly, from a bank perspective, because this person who was not supposed to pay the money back actually paid the money back, they can qualify for formal loans. So returnable grants have many advantages. We're now seeing companies do credit guarantees. We're now seeing companies actually leverage government's capital, right? Which suddenly means that $1 can now be multiplied 10x, 15x, 100x, depending on whose money you're unlocking. So really seeing blended finance, which is compliant both with CSI norms as well as with other government regulations, as emerging as a key trend, and we're very excited about that. The second key trend is India is very actively investing in a digital public infrastructure. So let me just tell you what that means, because India is sort of building these informational highways across many, many different sectors. Therefore, in our world, what it means is an entrepreneur can get grant capital from a company to start a business. The same entrepreneur can get a skilling course from the government. The same entrepreneur can get a market linkage with Amazon. The same entrepreneur can now get a credit guarantee backed loan through a bank. And so the ability to converge different people's services so that you can have a citizen-centric focus is really what's emerging. I know that the Indian government and others are actively taking this to Africa, to Brazil, and a lot of others were part of some of those conversations. But really, these two trends. A, companies really thinking about how do you unlock capital from other sources in a way to bring so many more resources, particularly at a time when resources are not there, they're uncertain, different pools of money may disappear overnight. And therefore, this is very good creative thinking. And then using this digital public infrastructure to now converge the delivery of support, services, products, mentorship, skilling, so that a young person, an entrepreneur, a person in school now gets services from many, many different places instead of just the company, right? Very exciting trends. When you add AI to the mix, it's even better because now I know exactly what the farmer wants and how that's different from the artisan and how that's different from somebody wanting a bank job, right? So the more you understand about an individual, the better you're able to customize a continuum of opportunities so that they succeed.
Thanks, Priya. Patricia, as part of our research on the handbook, we looked at social justice and the intersection of social justice and CSI. So businesses having an appetite to support matters around social justice, right? So whether it's voter education, free media, and the like. And we still see businesses kind of staying away from the politics. Brazil has a very vibrant activist and social justice culture. How are you seeing businesses supporting or not social justice initiatives in Brazil? Or is it something that they still stay away from?
No. There is a lot of companies that are investing on it. They are looking to peripheric communities and more vulnerable and bringing their knowledge to the table and publishing like guides about how to do that better. But actually, something that is innovative that we see here in Brazil, it's the alignment of the corporate, the CSI with the public policies, because the government has the scale to deliver, they have the capacity to do that in a larger way that any company could do, even with collaboration. So how they could do that? There is also some concern to be directly partnering with governments because there's a lot of problem with that. But they are also doing that through the civil societies. So, for instance, civil societies helping to reduce child mortality index in the municipality, or to reduce the index of violence in another city. So there's a lot of examples that could be give to show that the alignment of the CSI with the business interests, but also with public interests above all. We have to look to the what governments should do. As Priya said, there is time to call everybody, and it's a call to action. Governments must do and companies must do. And if they are partnering because governments here in Brazil, they don't allow it to take a lot of risks when they are modeling a public policy, because how can I say, it's difficult to test a really innovative way to do things with large group of people. So what civil society could help them to do is to give a seed money to prototype an idea, a social technology, or a modeling a public policy with a small group, and then enlarge that. It's a way to accelerate the government transformation and to scale the public impact. And social justice is also something that we are see some examples regarding that, but not only, also with health and long-term planning and other topics.
It's interesting to hear the parallels and the similarities. You mentioned, the conflicts between government, civil society, and business working together. We've experienced much the same thing here. Feryal, I'm going to come to you quickly on that point, you mentioned the DSD. There's been a lot of news around it, since last year, a number of deregistrations, South Africa trying to get off that grey list there. Quickly, what is one thing that NPOs can do? And you mentioned the support that businesses and CSI can play, to ensure compliance, so that you've got NPOs who are compliant, who are able to access grants, and who are, able to continue doing the work that is so needed on the ground.
I think, first of all, go and check your status. Often you don't know whether you're compliant. And some of us have been compliant for many years, until that 1 year when you get told that you didn't submit an annual report for 2014, and that's like 15 years later, and you now get told, and then you have to backtrack. So it's important for all of us to just go and check whether you are fully compliant. You can't assume. I assumed we were compliant, and we were told we didn't submit 2019. On checking, we did in fact submit 2019, but maybe not in the format that they had asked. And so it really is about checking that. Make sure that the board fully understands what beneficial ownership means, and that they actually comply with the reporting process of beneficial ownership. There again, you stand to be at risk of not complying, and then you're sitting now with a defunct board. So that's two of the things. I think just fully understanding what legal compliance means for you as an NGO. And you don't have to go far. It's literally picking up the phone DSD. If you're in the Western Cape, we've got stuff on our website. There's information everywhere. You've just got to make the time to find out what legal compliance means.
Okay, thanks for that, Feryal. I think that's important, and we'll include the links to all the organizations in Inyathelo as well in the write-up. So if you need help in terms of those compliance aspects that Feryal mentions, you'll be able to track those down. Thank you, everyone. Your time has flown. There was so much more that we could unpack, and I suppose we could have this conversation well into the evening, but a lot to do. So we've come to the end of today's webinar. I'm going to hand over to my panelists for a short takeaway, a note to leave all of our participants with. But before I get there, we're just going to put up the last poll for the day, and I suppose it's a good place for us to leave those of us who are in CSI, an indicator of what the primary role of businesses in addressing social challenges in South Africa should be. So I'll leave that up for a bit just before I hand over to my panelists, who will give us their 60-second tip, takeaway, or trend for us to look out for in 2025, and what we should be thinking about, either as corporates, as NPOs, as people working in the development sector as well, to really make it impactful, and being able to continue to do the good work that everyone does. Just a reminder that the write-up will be available on the Trialogue Knowledge Hub, and will be sent to everyone who registered for the webinar. So you'll get that in your inbox next week. Feel free to share it. You'll also find many other resources, like the case study on the collaborative network micro entrepreneurs in India, on the Knowledge Hub, various other case studies, lots of resources, the NPO directory as well there. So thank you for the voting on the poll. I think it's clear, providing direct funding and financial support to NPOs. I don't think, development would be able to survive without that. Driving systemic change through policy advocacy and public-private partnerships. I think that government, business, civil society relationship that Patricia mentioned there, how does business use its influence for good beyond just financial resources, and then developing sustainable business models and create shared value. I think that's one of the, shared values is really one of the core tenets or pillars that we advocate for at Trialogue. So it's great to see that coming through there. Thank you to everyone for voting. Let me start in reverse. Patricia, let me start with you. What's your one tip or takeaway that you'd like to leave our participants, our audience with?
For everything that we heard, we are in a complex world, in a fast movement of change. So we need to be more creative, more inclusive, and more collaborative, and we should do that fast. So this is my message for everyone, and thank you so much, because it's really good to look outside our box, and see that the challenges are quite similar in the world, in our countries, and there are much to do. So we are also open to receive collaboration from you and to work together, to keep working in Global Exchange Network, and to think about how we can show and disseminate this good practice. Priya talk about this blended finance and the way that you move the money and make it go around and go back to the companies so they can use that again. So I'm really interested about that also. I don't know if you have systematized this kind of experience, but I'm here open to learn with you, and also to share our experience whenever you want to invite me. It's going to be a pleasure. Thank you so much, Sheldon.
Thank you so much for your time, Patricia.
Priya,
Great to hear the common learnings from today's discussions. Priya, your one takeaway?
So as we confront an increasingly divisive world, the question is, can we all show up with all of the strengths that we have, right? As companies, as nonprofits, as consultants, as experts, but more importantly, as humans. So the question really is that while the world breaks around us, can we bring care, compassion, collaboration, humanity in a way that we are collectively stronger together, right? So really figuring out rapid ways of learning from each other, collaborating rapidly, and just being very open and being generous, right? With not just our challenges, but all the solutions that each one of us may have individually.
Thank you, Priya. I love that. Feryal, over to you. Your takeaway.
Okay, my 60 second. Okay, so I want to say, let's not just be funders and recipients of the funding, but let's commit to co-create and to make that positive change. And I also want to say that for me, it's a high time that we professionalize the sector. Nick spoke about it in his opening remarks as well. But professionalizing the sector is the only way. Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you so much, Feryal, and thank you so much for your time and insights today. Nick, your one takeaway to leave our audience with.
Thanks very much. Yeah, I think, we all have such a contribution to play, and we can play a stronger contribution by working within the space that we know, the businesses and the relationships, and if we leverage that and work that, and that's, I think, what I mean when I say stay in our lane. I don't think I was disagreeing with Feryal, but absolutely to innovate, absolutely to think out the box, absolutely to be brave and think at scale. And you don't need to take away your programmatic funding, but invest something in innovation, in how to look at more systemic change, process systems, collaborative processes, etc. Because that's really what's going to that we're going to have to do that to really shift the dial.
Okay, Nick, thank you very much for your time and your insights as well. Yeah, as I said, there just never is enough time, and with the amount of expertise and the great insights on this panel today, we could go well into the night. If you'd like to hear more from Nick and Feryal, just a reminder that they'll be leading masterclasses at our conference set to take place in May, on the 12th of May, those masterclasses, the conference proper, 13th, 14th May. Look out for registration details opening this week. And thank you so much to our audience who've stayed with us. You've been amazing. Thank you for all the questions, the engagement as well. It really made for a rich discussion. Our next webinar, we'll see you in March on the 27th, Thursday, the last Thursday of every month. Just a reminder, do look out for the write-up, which will be published on the Knowledge Hub, but will also be sent to all of you who registered. And just finally, at the end of this, there'll be a pop-up, a survey. If you could just take a couple of minutes to give us your thoughts on the discussion, and also what you'd like to see in future. It really does help us make these sessions as valuable and as effective for you as possible. Once again, thank you very much. Enjoy your morning, Patricia, your evening, Priya. Really is a global village. Nick, Feryal, enjoy your evening as well. Until we meet again, thank you, everyone.
Yes, bye.
Thanks, Sheldon.